Okay. Well, before we move into the next round of the interview, would you like to go ahead and jump on the phones?
Yeah, let's jump on some calls.
Okay, absolutely. Well, we've got Jen in Tennessee.
Hi, Jen.
Jen, what can we do for you tonight?
Hey, V.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys tonight?
Doing good. What can we help you with?
Well, it's just a topic that was kind of relevant, and it's not apparent,
miss it. I mean, this is
quote unquote, what they would call a typical disability, but reproductive disabilities and sex life and throwing a wrench into that. I had adenomyosis, which is I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's not a very common reproductive issue. It's the sister issue to endometriosis, and it made sex ridiculously painful. It enlarges your uterus. It pushes the cervix down to the point that a lot of women who do have this not only can't have sex, but can't have children. And instead of there being research on it and being a comprehensive cure outside of having a hysterectomy, there's really no funding for it. Also, I learned when I was previously married that I was not allowed to have a hysterectomy to cure the condition because my ex-husband wouldn't sign off on it, and we didn't have children.
That is just a remarkable thought.
That's disturbing.
It's amazing.
Wow.
I didn't have children, and my ex-husband wanted children. And when I had my son, I had asked for one during the C-section, and my ex-husband said no.
Wow.
So I was still made to keep a very painful and enlarged uterus that couldn't let me function for 2 weeks out of a month. But it's kind of overlooked, and it's more pitied on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's, oh, you poor thing. When are you going to start having children? Well, I have a reproductive condition. Oh, but there's adoption.
Right.
You can do in vitro. What about a surrogate? And it kills the sex life in a marriage. I mean, you don't want to be touched for 2 weeks out of a month. So this is kind of something that you don't want to be touched. And when you are touched, it's like, ow, ow, ow.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, how are you going to have kids if you can't get to the point of having them?
Well, and just the underlying concept that is where your value lies. You know, that if you don't have the ability to have children, then you're somehow no longer important as a person. And
right, exactly. That's the problem. The problem is the children you're not having, not that you're in pain.
Right, and this notion that by removing your uterus that, somehow you've given up, that you've given up on life, you've given up on your purpose. I mean, I think that is in many ways an underlying concept in all parts of our culture.
And it causes physical ailments. You look pregnant all the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You look pregnant all the time. It doesn't matter the weight you lose. These surgeries that require diagnosis separate your abdominal wall, so your abdominal wall never goes back to what it was. Trust me, no matter what you do. And this kind of falls for both biological male and biological female people. You're right, your worth is tied into you having kids. So when you turn around and say, I have a condition, it's either met with, oh, I'm so sorry. That must be devastating for you. No, I'm shocked I had a kid. That was never a driving force for me. I'm shocked I even had one. Or it's met with, we know an adoption broker. What about IVF? I have friends that have done this. And then you suddenly become the topic of these conversations from other people talking to their friends. And I'm like, wait, whoa, when did you start paying rent in my uterus? Talking about it.
Right,
And
exactly. You become a project.
Yeah, for as uncomfortable as we are as a society in talking about sex, we are remarkably comfortable talking about a woman's fertility. Not talking to a woman about her fertility, but making it like a community action problem.
And I remember when I went to have my diagnostic surgery to see what's wrong, my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law looked at me and I said, I'm going to find out if I can function for 2 weeks out of a month and what's going on and how we can get a grip on it. Both of them looked at me and went, and babies? Oh, yay, I'm an incubator. Joy for me, I have another purpose.
Yep.
But it's kind of something that we don't touch on for both biological male and biological female people is reproductive disabilities and reproductive issues do kind of cause a sense of dysphoria for your self-worth because you're constantly being told your worth is how many kids you can pump out for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you're a failure at that.
Yeah.
And you get well, why haven't you had kids yet? Are you going to have kids? And it's like, maybe I don't want to talk about this. Like, why?
Gotta keep the quiver full.
Gosh.
Oh, no, let's not even. Let's
Everybody just winced.
And I do wish it was something that was more talked about, especially in women's reproductive, biological women's reproductive systems. Men have Viagra. We have things that you can get at CVS. But I know from my condition, we don't know anything about it. The only cure is either a hysterectomy or a shot that surges your hormones for 6 months and then completely shuts them down repeatedly.
Yeah.
They say, take birth control. That shit don't work. Birth control don't work with this. It's, take a Pamperin and, frigging get over it.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of going back to what we were talking about in terms of kind of making some societal changes in how we view disability and how we accommodate it. Same with chronic illness, especially ones that affect primarily women. It's there's not the funding, there's not the research. Those things don't get talked about as much.
They're not respected. I was recently reading a piece about how up until, I think, a week ago in Germany, which has a very high sales tax in the way that their economy is structured, they were taxing tampons and pads and basically all menstrual products as a luxury good.
Yep.
Because as opposed to, the way they tax aspirin or Band-Aids or, those basic necessities of life.
Right, exactly. And that was just last week they nixed that. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Which is, it's exciting to talk about progress, but it's also just worth noting how little attention the people in power, and by the people in power, I mean hundreds of years of men, have paid attention to these types of issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the causes of mine is C-section. Mm-hmm. So this is something that you're expected to have a child. And when you have which we can get into a whole argument about the C-section mom thing, but now you're kind of lopped with this condition, and then what are they going to do for you about it? It's not important enough. What they tell you to do is have another C-section.
Yep.
You can only have another C-section now because of the scarring. You won't be able to have children or have a much lower chance of having children if that's what you want. This isn't even addressing the outside. My cramps were comparable to labor in the transition phase. It was so bad. I got pain meds thrown at me, and it took me 5 years for a doctor to take me seriously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they did research, and they were like, well, the period cramps are about the same, can be up there with heart attack in terms of pain threshold. And yet we're told, just suck it up, it's fine. And that's that's without additional complications to that whole process.
All right, and I've seen women with my condition, that had my condition, I've since had a hysterectomy, that have shown up to the ER hemorrhaging, bleeding, and, she just has her period, she has a quote-unquote heavy flow. And it's like, no, this woman is hemorrhaging. Why are we not taking her seriously?
Yeah.
I've seen teenage girls that have that endometriosis pass out in class from blood loss, and they're not even sent home. And it's mind-boggling to me. It's considered an autoimmune disease. This is chronic. And unless you are over the age of 35 and have 2 kids and get the permission of your husband, you can't find a cure for this.
Yeah.
You can't. You're not allowed to. I had to wait until I was divorced and single for years before they were like, we have nobody to ask. Okay, yeah, you can go.
Oh, my gosh.
You can have the rights over your own illness and your own body. And it blows my mind at this point.
Oh, yeah. The fact that this is still an argument that we have to have and a discussion that we need to talk about is exhausting and highlights how far we still need to go. Oh, my goodness.
It seems like this is a really perfect example. Of the way that the intersection between disability and being a woman or being female presented, that as you were talking about, that illnesses that are associated with biological females, that they're not as well researched, and then of course they're not taken seriously by doctors in emergency rooms and so forth. And, as a disabled person, any kind of disability, you're going to be coming up against the difference in what your body can do and what society expects you to do. So you already have that just on a purely physical level of, how do you work if you're not able to function 2 weeks out of the month? How do you get accommodations for that? But then adding being a woman on there too, then you're also dealing with the attitudes of, you're also not catering to the expectation of having children. You're also not catering to the expectation of like being easily available for sex and penetrative sex being the only type of sex that exists, and all that kind of thing. That you just have so many more avenues that you are not meeting the societal expectations and having to just go in the face of that and try to get your needs met anyways.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, 100%. Go on, Jen.
It's sad that reproductive issues are not seen as a disability. I know men and women that have had numerous surgeries, can't be at work without being on pain medication, can't drive. And they're offered nothing. It's oh, okay, well, your arms work, your legs work. It's just, here, take this pill.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Get back to work.
Yeah.
Why aren't you up taking care of the kids? Why is your house a mess? What do you mean you can't do this? How come you can't come into work? And when you look at the list of qualifying disabilities, none of them are covered.
Yeah.
None of them are covered.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Not
gosh,
for
that's
any
a
medical
whole
care,
that's a
not
whole other
for-
topic right
Yeah, I mean,
there.
a guy gets hit with a football in the balls and it's game over. Like we've got to call an ambulance, we've got to shut down the workplace, like everybody's got to go home. It's over. Sorry. I'm glad that we're talking about it. I'm glad that we're raising awareness. I'm glad that we are, working to push the needle and to change these things. But yeah, Jen, when you first called and talked about having to go through a divorce in order to get a procedure to make life palatable, it feels like something that if you told me happened in the 50s, I would be curious about. To recognize that it's happening, in many ways now and still, is very frustrating.
Yes.
Truly.
But on the flip side, it's you don't qualify for any form of disability. This is not seen as a disability,
Mm-hmm.
but it's considered a pre-existing condition and falls under the guidelines of being not coverable.
Of course.
A lot of insurance providers will also offer a maternity rider that you have to pay extra for because this is considered a reproductive issue. And should you get pregnant, may cause complications within the pregnancy. There's also two options for endometriosis and adenomyosis: hysterectomy or get pregnant. Those are the only ways your symptoms are going to alleviate themselves.
Oh my gosh.
Pop out more kids, don't have any more
Oh my
because
gosh.
there's no funding. There's no funding. There's no research for this. They still
Right.
don't know what causes adenomyosis. They don't know.
Right, exactly. Which is why we need to get more women into STEM so that we actually have people who care about this thing.
Well, and in government to enforce, insurance companies actually covering these important things, to enforce policies that, allow women to exist as people.
Right? Oh my gosh. Revolutionary
Not
thoughts
as
here.
incubators.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Jen, thank
Hey,
you
we're
so
more
much.
than an incubator. No problem, honey. It was good talking to you guys.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Good talking to you.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye. It's nice to hear from Jen.
Yeah, no question. And I just remain baffled.
Yeah. It's crazy. I remember in 2017, I was suddenly hit by something that I did not understand. I went looking for answers. I spent so much money and so much time in doctor's offices, just like specialist after specialist. What is wrong? Like do all of the scans, all of the exams, and they said it was IC, which is interstitial cystitis, which is just kind of a word for something's wrong. We don't really know what. We don't know how to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, it was debilitating. I couldn't go out. I couldn't do anything. Sex was off the table for months. And yeah, it also affects, what is it, like 98% women. And so, or people with urethras, that
Uteruses?
uterus, no, not uterus, because it's not reproductive.
Most
everyone
everybody has a
urethra,
urethra.
though.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, and I couldn't help but think, like, if these percentages were reversed, if only 2% women had this condition and it was 98% men, like would there be just throw your hands up in the air, like, we don't know, deal with it, I guess, like maybe it'll go away. So yeah, it's a real issue.
And that super long time of trying to find an answer, of seeking doctors and people not taking you seriously, and just like, what is going on, that is so central to the experience of being a chronically ill person. It's definitely true of disability too, but particularly for chronic illness. So the disability that I have, which also includes a bunch of chronic illnesses, is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it's a connective tissue disorder. It affects basically all of the systems in my body. But the way that it's a disability is it causes chronic pain and injury. But the average amount of time between first symptoms and diagnosis for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is 10 years.
Goodness.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
So I got lucky that I haven't had a formal diagnosis, but I got my answers about what was going on at 6 years after my initial symptoms, and just 1 year after my symptoms got severe.
Oof.
Well, and we mentioned, more women going into STEM, more women going into politics, these different things. Are there other options, solutions? I mean, obviously, we should be, voting with a conscience, voting with an awareness of these types of concerns. But what are maybe some of the answers specifically for these, I don't want to say reproductive, but particularly issues along these lines?
I think that there are two major ones. One is healthcare. Just making doctors more affordable to see, making tests more affordable, so that you can even have the option of going through that whole process of trying to find what's wrong, because many people don't.
Sure.
So that's a big part. I think the other part is, I don't know all of the specifics, but I know from a friend of mine who's worked in the medical industry that there are just a lot of structural issues in terms of how much time nurses or doctors get with patients, what boxes they have to check, and which forms they have to fill out, and that things are framed in a very like black and white way, and it makes it difficult for them to look at things in a more blurry sort of way, because bodies are not black and white. They have all sorts of weird things that happen. So some of those structural changes, and I had a friend who summarized it as, we need better doctors. That as much respect as I have for the doctors that exist, and particularly nurses, and how hard they work, there is a really big problem of doctors not taking patients seriously, of not listening to what the symptoms are. I recently heard from a friend of mine that has EDS, who they were seeing a new doctor, and they were looking at her x-rays from a few years ago, and they were saying, did you get a car accident in this frame of time? And she said, no. Why? And they said, well, we have these hip fractures that we knew about that were from blah 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 blah, but there's these other two hip fractures from that time that like the report says were recent to that time. What caused those? And she was like, I didn't know that I had those hip fractures. The doctor didn't tell me, because she just had chronic pain everywhere, so she didn't know. And the doctors knew, like, it was in the report, it was in the x-ray that there were these fractures. The report detailed what the fractures were, and that information was never given to her, and it was never used in terms of her treatment.
Oh my God.
And that's the thing that happens all the time, that people will have their results. It will actually say in the results what is going on, or this thing is unusual, or look, that x-ray is wrong. And they just won't do anything with the information, which I really don't understand why that's happening, other than like problems with like ego or something. But so whatever it is that we need to do to make that stuff happening would be great.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, hearing on commercials, ask your doctor if such and such is right for you, and being kind of confounded by that, thinking like, why should people go to the doctor and ask for a medication? Isn't that the doctor's job to be able to know and tell? And just the older I get, perhaps the more jaded I get, the more I realize how important it is for folks to be able to advocate for themselves, to become an expert on their own bodies and their own conditions, which is really not something that we should be, if I can use the word should, asking people to do. We should be able to let certain portions of the population specialize in learning everything about the body and rely on that, but it's certainly not the reality of the world that we live in.
Right. And it's interesting because I know that there are people who have brought up the connection between kind of realizing the gap in medical knowledge and medical concern for certain groups of people and the rise of things like the anti-vax movement and naturopathy and like depending on outside information and outside sources, because you are feeling like there are things I'm not being told. There are things that they're either keeping from me or they don't care to explain. So I'm going to go find my own way.
Yeah.
And more often than not, it's harmful or at least ineffective.
Yeah, it's ignorant homeopathy, or it's, WebMD and everything is cancer.
Oh, yeah.
you
Well,
know.
yes.
So,
yes.
yeah, our tools and our options are really limited, sadly.
Yeah.